We are on the first Sunday of Advent. We are going to run 4 weeks now, 4 Sundays before we get to Christmas. And Advent is a season of preparation, anticipation. It's a season of waiting. So let me speak about the spiritual value of the season of Advent. I was recalling this morning with the Eucharistic ministers some years ago, 20 years ago maybe, I was taking communion to the homebound persons around Christmas time. And I think maybe Christmas Eve or the day before, I got to visit Walter in El Sereno. Walter was an African-American man. He was a paraplegic, always cheerful, always cheerful. He played the piano, wore a little hat. He was right out of the movies. A wonderful man, a man of faith. And I remember after I gave him communion, I said, "Now, Walter, how is it that you are so happy and you are so relaxed as we come up to Christmas, and I'm so stressed out trying to get everything done?" And he said, "Father, you don't understand. I belong to the kingdom. You belong to the world." And I said, "Oh." There is a way in which either we're led by kingdom values or we're led by the values of the world during this lead-up time to Christmas. So let me look at that. Advent comes from a Latin word, adventus, which means arrival, from the verb advenire, meaning to come. The past participle is adventus, gives us the word Advent. We are waiting for the coming of the Lord. So what does this mean to us? There was a very short period of about 40 years, way back in the beginning of the 15th century, the end of the 15th, beginning of the 16th century. It's called the High Renaissance, and it was dominated very much by 3 names: Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael. And during this 40 years, very short period, we had the Pietà, we had David, who is in Florence, Sistine Chapel, we had the Basilica of St. Peter's, and we had Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper, which is in Milan. And Da Vinci took some years to complete the Last Supper, and his objective was to capture the moment when Jesus told his disciples that someone would betray him, to catch the dynamic of that moment. That was Da Vinci's intent with his representation of the Last Supper. He also wanted to include simultaneously the institution of the Eucharist. So he has Jesus pointing to the Eucharist, to the bread and the wine. Now, this year, 2019, we celebrated 500 years since the death of Leonardo da Vinci. And in all the years, sometimes it's difficult to separate mythology and stories to real historical fact. But there is one story told about the time when Da Vinci was doing the Last Supper, and he came to Judas. Now, at that time, Da Vinci was in a hostile, fierce battle with another painter. They were mortal enemies. And as a gesture of how he felt, he painted the face of his enemy onto Judas with a statement that it will be there forever and people will know what a bad guy he was. And then when he got to the face of Jesus, somehow he couldn't complete the face of Jesus. There was some impediment. He couldn't figure out what it was, but he couldn't finish the face of Jesus. And after a while, it came to him that as long as he had this animus against his enemy, he couldn't paint the face of Jesus. So he reconciled with his enemy, and he changed the face of Judas. And then he was able to paint and finish the face of Jesus. Well, now that's an Advent thought. It's a season of reconciliation. And there is no way in which we can celebrate the coming of the Lord until we have been reconciled. So wherever there is a need in our lives to be reconciled with a person, to be reconciled with the poor, with the homeless, with the indigent people, to be reconciled somehow with the undocumented people, with people on Skid Row and people on death row, until we are reconciled somehow and find a theology that somehow brings the gospel into these relationships. Until that time, we cannot see the face of Jesus. We cannot truly celebrate the birth of Jesus Christ. That's the first teaching that comes about Advent. Advent is a season of a reorganization. It's a season of preparation for the coming of the Lord. It's a season to be reconciled and to walk in peace with everybody. The second thought that fits into the Advent season, I will introduce by remembering the anchorites of old, the ancient mothers and fathers of the desert. And they counseled the monk or the anchorite, go to your cell. Your cell will teach you everything you need to know about God, about life, and about yourself. Go to your cell. That's where you will discover the presence of God. Now, the cell is a metaphor. It's a metaphor for my vocation, my promises in life. It's a metaphor for my commitments in life, my way of life. It's a metaphor for the values of being a disciple of Jesus Christ. That's where I must stand, and that's where I dwell. That's my cell. Thomas à Kempis wrote The Imitation of Christ in the 15th century. It's still very much used as a spiritual guide. And in this he says, a person who leaves a cell comes back less a person. When you leave your vocation, when you betray your promise, when somehow you distance yourself from being a disciple, a true disciple of the gospel, you become a lesser person, says Thomas Aquinas. So this season of Advent, in some ways, is very searching. It's demanding. It calls us to look deeper inside ourselves, and we'll get consumed in the whole frantic economy, an enterprise that will draw us in and take all our time and all our attention, and we'll forget so easily that Advent is a season to prepare ourselves for the coming of the Lord. So where are my promises? Where are my vows in my life? Where are my core relationships? Where is the wound? The wound in a family, the wound in a relationship. How do I give attention to these things and somehow draw them into a passage called Advent, so that when we come to Christmas, we're not celebrating Santa Claus, we're celebrating the birth of Jesus Christ. Not only the birth of Jesus Christ in the celebration of the church, but the birth of Jesus Christ in our homes and within ourselves. That's the whole meaning of the season of Advent. So take a second look. And remembering Walter's caution to me, choose to belong to the kingdom, not to the world. Amen.